Midnight, to one of the most disturbing cases recorded in the history of the Missouri Ozarks. Welcome. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you are watching from, and the exact time you're listening to this narration. We are interested in knowing to what places these documented accounts reach, and at what times of day or night. 025, the remote settlement of Black Hollow in the Missouri Ozarks became, in the autumn of 1892, the center of events that would challenge the understanding of even the most seasoned investigators of the time. Deep within the rugged terrain of Tenney County it was nestled, this isolated community of no more than 40 souls who lived according to rhythms established generations before the Civil War had ever touched their mountains. 051, for nearly 3 miles between steep limestone bluffs the hollow itself stretched, accessible only by a narrow trail that wound through dense oak and hickory forests. Beyond the nearest trading post in Forsyth, some 25 miles to the northeast through treacherous mountain paths that claimed lives every winter, most residents had never ventured. 116, a natural fortress of solitude was created by the geography of Black Hollow. Through the valley floor, Bull Creek meandered, fed by dozens of springs that emerged from the limestone bedrock. So pure was the water that travelers would detour miles from established routes just to fill their containers from these mountain sources. Yet this same isolation that provided life-sustaining water also created conditions where secrets could fester for generations, where families could disappear without notice, and where the line between civilization and wilderness became 149, increasingly blurred. That various Native American groups had occupied the hollow for centuries before European settlement was suggested by archaeological evidence. As seasonal shelters, Creek and Cherokee hunting parties had used the extensive cave systems, leaving behind pictographs and artifacts that early settlers found both fascinating and disturbing. 215, scenes that seemed to document rituals and practices bearing no resemblance to the religious traditions familiar to Christian settlers were depicted in these ancient markings. More troubling were the symbols that appeared to show human figures undergoing transformations, their bodies elongated and distorted in ways that suggested either artistic symbolism or documentation of actual witnessed events. 242, at the heart of this community stood the Grimm family homestead, a weathered log structure built in 1847 by Heinrich Grimm when he first claimed the land under provisions of the Federal Homestead Acts. As part of a wave of German immigration that brought skilled craftsmen and farmers to the frontier territories, Heinrich had arrived in the Ozarks. 304, knowledge of traditional European folk medicine and agricultural techniques that served him well in the challenging mountain environment he possessed. Sophisticated understanding of local building materials and climate conditions was demonstrated by the original cabin he constructed, incorporating features that would not become common in regional architecture for another generation. 329, to his son Jacob Grimm, a man of 43 years, the property had passed by 1892, who lived there with his wife Martha and their 4 children, Samuel, aged 19, Rebecca, 17, young Heinrich, 12, and little Mary, just 8 years old. Not only his father's land, but also his extensive knowledge of traditional medicine and his collection of books and manuscripts that dealt with subjects rarely discussed openly in frontier communities, Jacob had inherited. 402, for such a remote location, the Grimm family library was unusual. Volumes on botany, anatomy, and natural philosophy that would have been considered advanced even in established eastern cities were possessed by Jacob. More intriguing were the handwritten journals and notebooks passed down through generations of the family, documents that contained detailed observations of local plant life, cave systems, and geological formations. 431, a level of systematic investigation and documentation was revealed by these manuscripts, suggesting the Grimms viewed their mountain home as more than simply a place to farm and raise livestock. In a similar German immigrant family in the neighboring county, Martha Grimm, born Martha Schneider, had grown up. 453, extensive for a frontier woman was her education, including literacy in both German and English, basic mathematics, and comprehensive knowledge of herbal medicine and food preservation. In 1870 she had married Jacob, and the early years of their marriage were described by neighbors as remarkably harmonious. For her intelligence, her skill in treating injuries and illnesses, and her ability to predict weather patterns with uncanny accuracy, Martha was known. 521, with an unusual combination of practical frontier skills and scholarly pursuits, the 4 Grimm children had been raised. Remarkable ability in tracking and hunting was demonstrated by Samuel, the eldest, but interest in his father's books and manuscripts he also showed. To read and write in both German and English he had learned, and knowledge of local geography that surpassed that of much older residents he possessed. 548, similar intellectual gifts were displayed by Rebecca, but her interests focused more on botanical studies and the medicinal properties of native plants. Their individual characteristics were still being developed by young Heinrich and Mary, but signs of the family's distinctive combination of practical skills and scholarly inclinations were shown by both. 611, unusual sensitivity to changes in weather and animal behavior was demonstrated by Heinrich, while remarkable ability to locate water sources and navigate through dense forest without becoming lost was shown by Mary. In Black Hollow, the Grimm family's reputation was complex. For their knowledge and skills they were respected, frequently consulted when neighbors faced medical emergencies or agricultural problems. 639, yet an undercurrent of unease about the family's activities and interests there also was. Considerable time exploring cave systems that other residents avoided they were known to spend, and they were rumored to possess knowledge of local history and geography that seemed to exceed what could be learned through normal observation and experience. 701, on October 15, 1892, when Samuel Grimm failed to return from checking the family's trap lines along Raw Creek, the first indication that something was amiss came. Before dawn the boy had left, as was his custom, carrying his father's old percussion rifle and a small canvas sack for any game he might find. 721, with him he had also taken a leather-bound notebook in which he recorded observations about animal behavior and weather patterns. One of the few tangible clues to his fate would this notebook later prove to be. When darkness fell and he had not returned, a search party with 3 neighboring families, the Kellys, the Hoffmans, and the Mlouds, was organized by Jacob. 746, experienced woodsmen who knew every trail and landmark within a 15-mile radius of the hollow, these were. Despite the difficulty of navigating the rough terrain in darkness, the search began immediately. Torches and lanterns were gathered, and in a systematic pattern designed to cover the most likely routes Samuel would have taken, the men spread out. 810, beside the creek, they found Samuel's rifle, its barrel submerged in the shallow water. No signs of damage or struggle were shown by the weapon, and loaded with the original charge Jacob had prepared earlier that morning it remained. Nearby lay his canvas sack, torn and empty, but the tear pattern suggested deliberate cutting rather than accidental damage. 832, most disturbing of all was the complete absence of his notebook, which Samuel never traveled without, and which would have been valuable to anyone familiar with its contents. Defying easy explanation were the tracks discovered in the soft mud along the bank, and they would be discussed and debated by residents of the hollow for decades to come. 855, clearly visible in several locations were Samuel's boot prints, showing that he had moved along the creek bank for some distance before stopping at the spot where his rifle was found. But impressions that challenged the observer's understanding of what they were seeing were alongside his tracks. Later to the county sheriff, old Thomas Kelly, who had tracked game through these mountains for over 50 years, told that the accompanying prints appeared to be made by bare feet, but of unusual size and proportion. 926, feet that were longer and narrower than normal, with what appeared to be unusually extended toes, were suggested by the impressions. Someone of considerable weight, perhaps 200 pounds or more, was indicated by the depth of the impressions. Yet a much smaller individual was suggested by the stride length and gait pattern. More puzzling still was the discovery of additional print types that seemed to indicate the presence of multiple individuals. 954, completely normal some impressions appeared, suggesting the involvement of at least one person of conventional build and gait. Characteristics that the experienced trackers found impossible to categorize were shown by others. That a meeting or gathering had taken place at the creekside was suggested by the arrangement of the various tracks, with Samuel's movements indicating he had approached willingly rather than under duress. 1023, for 3 days the search continued, with the initial party expanding to include men from as far away as Branson and Hollister. Caught on thorny underbrush nearly 2 miles from where his rifle was discovered, they found scraps of Samuel's clothing. But no signs of violence or struggle were shown by the fabric. Instead, the result of rapid movement through dense vegetation the tears appeared to be, as if Samuel had been running or moving quickly through areas where normal travel would require careful navigation. 10:55, toward the most remote and difficult terrain in the region led the trail of fabric scraps. Areas where even experienced hunters rarely ventured due to the dangerous combination of steep cliffs, unstable rock formations, and cave systems that could easily trap the unwary. At the base of a sheer rock face that rose nearly 100 feet above Raw Creek in a location that seemed impossible to reach without specialized climbing equipment, the final piece of Samuel's clothing was found. 11:24, during this period of intensive searching, considerable attention from their neighbors and the volunteers who had come to help was drawn by the behavior of the Grimm family members. While strong emotional reactions from family members typically were brought out by such situations, responses that struck many observers as unusual and troubling were displayed by the Grimms. 11:47, behavior that ranged from unnaturally calm to almost detached from the crisis at hand was exhibited by Martha Grimm. While consumed with grief, anxiety, or frantic activity might have been other mothers in similar circumstances, her daily routines with mechanical precision she maintained. Meals for the search parties she continued to prepare, tend to household tasks, and care for her remaining children as if nothing extraordinary was happening. 12:15, when directly questioned about Samuel's disappearance, as if he were merely delayed rather than missing, she spoke of him, expressing confidence that he would return when his current activities were completed. To the search volunteers, more disturbing were Martha's references to knowledge about Samuel's whereabouts that she claimed to have received through dreams and visions. 12:39, of communication with her son that occurred during sleep she spoke, describing conversations in which he assured her of his safety and explained that he was engaged in important work that prevented his immediate return. Initially dismissed as the wishful thinking of a worried mother were these claims, but remarkably accurate in several instances, proved Martha's detailed descriptions of locations and activities. 13:07, from the county seat in Forsyth, when Sheriff Henry Coulson arrived, he found a situation that challenged his experience with frontier crises and family emergencies. A veteran lawman who had dealt with numerous cases of missing persons, domestic violence, and wilderness accidents during his 15 years in office was Sheriff Coulson. 13:29, on his ability to quickly assess situations and determine the most likely explanations for unusual events, he prided himself. Profoundly unsettled left him his interview with Martha Grimm. Measured, detailed, and internally consistent were her responses to his questions, but a version of events that seemed to exist in a different reality from that experienced by other family members and neighbors they described. 13:55, for several weeks Samuel had been preparing for this disappearance, she claimed, gathering supplies and information for what she described as an important journey of discovery. Voluntary and purposeful rather than the result of accident or foul play, she insisted his absence was. More troubling were Martha's references to Samuel's involvement in activities that she described as continuing the work begun by previous inhabitants of the region. 14:26, of ancient knowledge preserved in the cave systems of the Hollow, she spoke information that had been passed down through generations of people who understood the true nature of the mountain environment. According to Martha, unusual sensitivity to this hidden knowledge had been demonstrated by Samuel, and a role in preserving and extending it he had been selected to play. 14:48, frustrating proved Sheriff Coulson's attempts to obtain more specific information about these claims. Detailed and consistent were Martha's explanations, but to concepts and activities that seemed to have no basis in observable reality they referred. Of communication networks that operated without conventional means she spoke, of knowledge that could be transmitted directly from mind to mind, and of discoveries that had been made in the hidden chambers beneath the mountains. 15:18, additional disturbing information about the household's dynamics and Samuel's behavior were revealed by the sheriff's interviews with the other Grimm family members. That Samuel had been troubled by strange dreams and visions that began sometime in late August, in the weeks before his disappearance, Rebecca, the eldest daughter, confided. 15:40, of hearing voices calling to him from the deep woods he had spoken, voices that seemed to know intimate details about his life and family history. According to Rebecca's account, these voices had provided Samuel with detailed information about the cave systems in the region, including the locations of chambers and passages that were not marked on any available maps. 1604, solitary expeditions into these underground areas Samuel had begun making, returning with artifacts and specimens that he claimed proved the existence of previous inhabitants whose knowledge and capabilities exceeded those of current settlers. Additional insights into his brother's changing behavior and interests were provided by young Hinrich, despite his youth. 1629, in a language that no one in the family recognized, Samuel had begun speaking, he reported, carrying on extended conversations with individuals who were not visible to other family members. Exchanges of information rather than simple expressions of mental disturbance, these conversations appeared to be, with Samuel asking questions and apparently receiving detailed answers about subjects ranging from local history to advanced techniques of agriculture and medicine. 1658, finding Samuel in various locations around the family property at unusual hours, the boy also described, often standing motionless in positions that suggested he was listening intently to sounds that others could not hear. On several occasions, into the forest Heinrich had followed his brother, watching as Samuel navigated directly to specific locations without reference to trails or landmarks, moving with confidence through terrain that would have challenged experienced woodsmen. 1732, equally disturbing, though in different ways from those of his wife, proved Jacob Grimm's responses to questioning. Unlike Martha's calm certainty about Samuel's safety and purpose, signs of deep anxiety and confusion about his son's disappearance were displayed by Jacob. That Samuel had been acting strangely in recent weeks he acknowledged, but to the normal stresses of growing up in an isolated environment rather than to any supernatural or unexplained influences he attributed these changes. 1803, more significantly, to Sheriff Coulson, Jacob admitted that extensive written records about the history and geography of Black Hollow were possessed by the family, information that had been compiled over several generations by various residents and previous inhabitants of the region. According to Jacob, these documents contained detailed maps of cave systems, descriptions of artifacts and markings found in underground chambers, and accounts of unusual events and phenomena that had occurred in the area over a period of more than a century. 1839 troubled Sheriff Coulson Jacob's reluctance to share these documents with the investigation, but legal authority to demand access to private family papers without evidence of criminal activity the sheriff lacked. Fragile and potentially dangerous if misinterpreted, Jacob insisted the materials were, and concern that making them public could lead to treasure hunting and vandalism that would damage important historical sites, he expressed. 1906, on October 19, after 4 days of intensive effort by more than 30 volunteers, the search for Samuel was officially called off. On the practical reality that the available resources had been exhausted and that further searching would require equipment and expertise that were not available in the region, the decision was based. 1930, a formal missing person report Sheriff Coulson filed and requested assistance from federal authorities, but unlikely that additional resources would be allocated to the case were made by the remote location and limited evidence. With a stoicism that impressed some observers and disturbed others, Jacob Grimm accepted the end of the official search. 1953, to the volunteers who had participated he expressed gratitude and acknowledged the thorough nature of their efforts, but no signs of the desperation or continuing hope that might be expected from a father in such circumstances he showed. Instead, of accepting God's will and of trusting that Samuel's fate would ultimately be revealed according to divine timing, he spoke. 2014, as autumn deepened into winter, into routines that reflected the absence of their eldest son, but also suggested a level of preparation and acceptance that seemed inconsistent with the unexpected nature of his disappearance, the Grimm household settled. Among the remaining family members, Samuel's responsibilities were redistributed with an efficiency that suggested prior planning, and with minimal disruption continued the family's daily activities. 2044, among the residents of Black Hollow, the subject of considerable discussion became Martha Grimm's behavior during this period. Alone into the same areas where Samuel had disappeared, she began taking long walks, often remaining away from the cabin for hours at a time. About these excursions, when questioned, peace and clarity in the forest environment she explained that she found, and that her walks helped her maintain spiritual connection with her missing son. 2112, into terrain that even experienced hunters approached with caution took these solitary journeys Martha. Familiarity with cave entrances and underground passages that were not marked on available maps she demonstrated, and knowledge of local geography that exceeded what could have been gained through casual exploration she showed. 2133, That she moved through the difficult terrain with confidence and purpose, reported neighbors who encountered her during these walks, following routes that seemed to have been carefully planned in advance. More troubling were reports that Martha had been observed in locations and at times that seemed impossible given the distances involved and the challenging nature of the terrain. 2157, simultaneously in different parts of the hollow, claimed multiple witnesses to have seen her, leading to speculation about whether she was receiving assistance from unknown accomplices or whether the observers had been mistaken in their identification. Many of her mother's domestic responsibilities with a maturity that seemed to exceed her 17 years assumed Rebecca Grimm, now the eldest child remaining at home. 2222, that she had developed a serious, almost haunted expression that replaced her former youthful enthusiasm and curiosity about the world beyond Black Hollow was noted by neighbors. Unless directly addressed, she rarely spoke, and social gatherings and community activities that had previously brought her enjoyment she began avoiding. 2242, particularly evident in her relationship with the natural environment around the family homestead, was the girl's transformation. Previously, the woods and fields near the cabin Rebecca had enjoyed exploring, collecting specimens for botanical studies, and helping with outdoor work. However, after Samuel's disappearance, an aversion to venturing far from the immediate vicinity of the house she seemed to develop, and signs of anxiety when required to travel even short distances into the forest she showed. 2313, their own troubling adaptations to the changed circumstances of their family life were displayed by young Heinrich and Mary. Increasingly prone to violent outbursts became Heinrich, striking his sister or destroying household items with little apparent provocation. By periods of complete withdrawal during which he would remain silent and unresponsive for hours at a time, these episodes were followed. 2340, signs of the unusual sensitivity to environmental conditions that had characterized Samuel's behavior the boy also began showing, predicting weather changes and animal behavior with accuracy that exceeded normal childhood intuition. Perhaps the most dramatic transformation of any family member underwent Mary, the youngest at 8 years old. 2400 hours 03, previously known as a chatty and curious child who delighted in asking questions and exploring her surroundings, silent and withdrawn she became, often found staring out the cabin windows toward the tree line for extended periods. When she did speak, to conversations she claimed to have with Samuel, her comments often referred, describing detailed exchanges that suggested ongoing contact with her missing brother. 2400 hours 29, particularly harsh proved winter in the Ozarks during 1892–93, with heavy snows that began in late November and continued intermittently through March. Complete became the isolation that was already a defining characteristic of Black Hollow as the mountain passes became impassable and communication with the outside world was reduced to occasional visits by the most determined travelers. 2400 hours 58, entirely on their stored provisions, preserved foods, and whatever hunting and trapping could be accomplished despite the severe weather conditions were forced to rely families. Within the Grimm household, during this period of enforced isolation, that the most disturbing events began to unfold. 25:29, the first indication of serious problems came in late December, just days before Christmas, when into the cabin of their nearest neighbors, the Kellys, in a state of complete hysteria burst Heinrich. Barely clothed despite the bitter cold was the boy, his feet bloody from running barefoot through snow that was more than a foot deep in most areas. Fragmented and difficult to follow was Heinrich's account of conditions at his family's cabin, but consistent and deeply troubling were certain details. 25:49, that his mother had been undergoing some kind of transformation that made her increasingly unrecognizable as the person he had known throughout his childhood, he claimed. According to the boy, in activities that he could not understand or explain, Martha spent most of her time speaking in languages that none of the family members recognized and performing tasks that seemed to serve no practical purpose. 26:15, more distressing were Heinrich's descriptions of his father's response to these changes. So disturbed by his wife's behavior had Jakob apparently become that in the root cellar beneath the cabin he had taken to sleeping, emerging only when absolutely necessary for essential tasks such as caring for the livestock or gathering firewood. 26:37, in a state of constant fear the boy described his father as existing, convinced that the woman living in their cabin was no longer his wife, but some kind of imposter or possessed individual. Immediately accompanied Hinrich back to the Grimm homestead did Thomas Kelly and his adult son, William, despite the dangerous conditions and their own concerns about what they might encounter there. 27:01, more than an hour required the journey through the deep snow, and at the cabin as darkness was beginning to fall they arrived. Entirely normal appeared the exterior of the cabin, with smoke rising peacefully from the chimney and no obvious signs of disturbance or violence. 27:27, however, a dramatically different story that challenged the visitors' understanding of what they were witnessing was told by the interior of the building. Completely rearranged had been the main living area, with furniture moved into positions that served no apparent practical purpose. Throughout the room, according to patterns that seemed to follow some kind of organizational system that the visitors could not comprehend, were now distributed items that had previously been stored in logical locations. 27:56, more disturbing were the various objects and materials that had been added to the room since the Kellys' last visit to the household. On every available surface were arranged glass containers filled with plant materials and unidentifiable liquids, each carefully labeled with symbols that bore no resemblance to any writing system familiar to the visitors. 28:19, from the rafters hung bundles of dried herbs and roots, creating a complex network of organic materials that filled the air with strong, unfamiliar scents. In her rocking chair by the fire sat Martha Grimm, but so dramatically altered was her appearance that the Kellys initially failed to recognize her as the woman they had known for more than 20 years. 28:44, a considerable amount of weight she had lost, her clothes hanging loosely on a frame that seemed to have physically diminished in size. Wild and unkempt had grown her hair, once a rich brown and carefully maintained, streaked with premature gray that made her appear decades older than her actual age. Most disturbing were the changes in her eyes and facial expression. 29:08, an intensity that made direct eye contact extremely uncomfortable had taken on Martha's gaze, and somehow sharpened and more angular than before seemed her facial features. When she acknowledged the visitors, a different quality with pronunciation and inflection that suggested she was speaking English as a second language rather than the native tongue she had used throughout her life in the Hollow had acquired her voice. 29:33, by name she greeted Thomas and William Kelly, but her manner suggested that upon memories of their relationship she was drawing rather than experiencing genuine recognition or emotional connection. About her family's circumstances and Hinrich's distressed condition, when asked, answers that were factually accurate but delivered with a detachment that seemed inconsistent with normal parental concern she provided. 30:04, more troubling still were her references to Samuel's continuing presence in the household. As if he were physically present, Martha spoke of her missing son, describing recent conversations and shared activities as if his disappearance had never occurred. When the Kellys attempted to remind her that Samuel had been missing for more than 2 months, their concern she acknowledged, but insisted that their perception of the situation was based on incomplete information about the true nature of human consciousness and communication. 30:36, about Jacob's whereabouts, when Thomas Kelly asked, toward the floor Martha simply pointed, indicating the root cellar beneath the cabin. Huddled among the stored vegetables and preserved meats, wrapped in blankets and shivering, the visitors found Jacob Grimm. Despite the relatively warm temperature of the underground space, little resemblance to the confident, capable farmer they had known for years bore the man they discovered. 31:01, that he had been living in the cellar for an extended period was suggested by Jacob's physical condition, surviving on stored food and water that Rebecca brought down to him through a system of ropes and baskets. Completely white had turned his hair, and with what might have been cold, fear, or some combination of both conditions trembled his hands. 31:23, most significantly, years in the span of months he seemed to have aged, his face marked by deep lines and an expression of perpetual anxiety. Little coherent sense to his visitors made Jacob's explanation of his living situation, but genuine and profound was his terror. That the woman living above them in the cabin was no longer his wife, but some kind of replacement or transformed version of Martha, who possessed knowledge and capabilities that no normal human being could have acquired, he claimed. 31:58, conducting conversations with multiple individuals during the night, he spoke of hearing her, despite the fact that no visitors had been observed coming or going from the isolated homestead. More disturbing were Jacob's accounts of discovering evidence that Martha was conducting activities that seemed to require knowledge of chemistry, botany, and other subjects that she had never studied. 32:23, complex apparatus and materials that appeared to be related to some kind of systematic research or experimentation. He described finding work that was being conducted according to principles and procedures that exceeded his understanding. That Martha had begun demonstrating abilities that seemed to transcend normal human limitations. Jacob also reported 32:45, about events occurring in distant locations without access to information through conventional means she appeared to know, and familiarity with the extensive cave systems beneath Black Hollow that could only have been acquired through years of systematic exploration. She showed. Most troubling of all, with individuals who were not physically present, she seemed to be in communication, conducting detailed conversations that suggested access to sources of knowledge that existed outside the normal boundaries of human experience. 33:16, to accept assistance from the community, the Kellys attempted to persuade both Jacob and Martha, but neither seemed capable of acknowledging that their situation was abnormal or problematic. Safer in the root cellar, Jacob insisted that he was, and that any attempt to interfere with Martha's activities would result in consequences that he could not adequately describe. 33:41, their concern Martha acknowledged, but maintained that their perception of the situation was based on misunderstanding about the nature of her current work and responsibilities. Occasionally peering around corners and moving through the shadows of the cabin could be observed young Rebecca, but direct contact with the visitors she avoided, and in a state of constant anxiety about her family's circumstances she seemed to exist. 34:06, to speak with her directly, when Thomas Kelly attempted, to areas of the cabin where the visitors could not follow she fled, suggesting that she had been instructed to avoid contact with outsiders. Most mysterious of all was the complete absence of young Mary, who could not be located despite thorough searching of the cabin and immediate vicinity. 34:27, about the child's whereabouts, when asked, vague responses that suggested Mary was safe and well cared for, but occupied with activities that required privacy and concentration Martha provided. When questioned separately, Jacob admitted that he had not seen his youngest daughter for several weeks and expressed profound concern about her fate. 34:52, by what they had witnessed, disturbed, to return with them to their own cabin where he could be properly fed and cared for while they determined what action to take regarding his family's situation, convinced the Kellys Hinrich. Their primary source of information about the deteriorating conditions in the Grimm household proved to be the boy, though so disturbing that the adults found them difficult to believe or accept were often his accounts. 35:18, according to Heinrich, gradually in the weeks following Samuel's disappearance had begun the changes in his mother, but had accelerated dramatically as winter deepened and the family's isolation became complete. Increasing amounts of time studying the collection of books and manuscripts that had been passed down through generations of the Grimm family had started spending Martha, focusing particularly on materials that dealt with subjects related to natural history, geology, and what Heinrich described as underground knowledge. 35:51, regular expeditions into cave systems that were located within walking distance of the family homestead had begun making Martha, reported the boy, returning with various materials and specimens that she processed and stored according to procedures that seemed to follow systematic scientific principles. Primarily during daylight hours while the children were occupied with their own responsibilities were these activities conducted. 36:19, but from concealed positions had occasionally observed his mother's work. Heinrich. More troubling were Hinrich's accounts of nighttime activities that he had witnessed from his sleeping area in the cabin's loft. That Martha regularly left the cabin after the family was supposed to be asleep, he claimed, remaining away for hours at a time, despite the dangerous winter conditions and the complete darkness that prevailed in the hollow during the long winter nights. 36:48, on several occasions, his mother's departure and return through the small window near his bed he had observed, noting that through the difficult terrain with confidence that suggested extensive familiarity with routes that would challenge even experienced outdoorsmen during daylight hours she moved. Even more disturbing were Hinrich's claims about visitors to the cabin during the night hours. 37:11, figures approaching the homestead after dark. He reported seeing individuals who moved through the snow without leaving the deep tracks that would normally be expected. through methods that did not involve normal speech, appeared to communicate these visitors with Martha, and for hours sometimes continued their meetings before they departed as silently as they had arrived. 37:35, fragmented and inconsistent were the boy's descriptions of these mysterious visitors, but certain details appeared repeatedly in his accounts. Individuals who seemed to be unusually tall and thin he described, who moved with a gliding motion that did not appear entirely natural, and who wore clothing that provided no apparent protection against the severe winter weather, yet seemed unaffected by the cold conditions. 38:05, most significantly, various items that Martha incorporated into her ongoing activities and experiments claimed Heinrich that these visitors brought with them. Boxes, containers, and wrapped packages that were exchanged during these nighttime meetings he described seeing, materials that were later stored in areas of the cabin and root cellar that had been designated for Martha's exclusive use. 38:30, a dilemma that was common to isolated frontier communities, but nonetheless challenging to resolve satisfactorily, were faced with by the Kellys. In Forsyth, more than 25 miles away through mountain terrain that was essentially impassable during winter conditions, was located the nearest law enforcement. Moreover, whether any laws were being violated by the strange behavior they had witnessed, they were uncertain. 38:58, a domestic crisis might be represented by a woman conducting unusual experiments and a man hiding in his root cellar, but clear evidence of criminal activity they hardly constituted. As neighbors providing assistance or conducting trade that was kept private for personal reasons could be explained the mysterious nighttime visitors. 39:20, to the stress of losing a child and the hardships of frontier life during a particularly severe winter might be attributed even the dramatic changes in Martha's appearance and behavior. After considerable discussion, from Reverend Isaiah Morris, a circuit preacher who made regular rounds through the region and was scheduled to visit Black Hollow during the third week of January, decided to seek guidance the Kellys. 39:46, with similar situations in other remote communities had dealt Reverend Morris, and possessed both the authority and experience necessary to determine appropriate courses of action. In the meantime, to provide care for Heinrich and to monitor the situation at the Grimm homestead as closely as possible given the weather conditions and the family's apparent desire for privacy, they agreed. 40:10, to other families in the Hollow they also sent word requesting that they remain alert for any signs of additional problems or emergency situations that might require community response. Among the most difficult and disturbing in the memory of Black Hollow's longtime residents proved to be the weeks that followed. The severe weather continued, making travel and communication extremely hazardous. 40:36, but about unusual activities and phenomena that seemed to center around the general area of the Grimm property began to circulate reports. Lights moving through the forest during the nighttime hours reported seeing several neighbors, illumination that appeared too bright and too consistent to be explained by torches or lanterns. 40:56, regular patterns seemed to follow these lights, moving along routes that connected various cave entrances and other significant geographical features in the region. On multiple nights by different families were observed the lights, suggesting systematic activity rather than random or accidental phenomena. 41:19, more disturbing were reports of sounds echoing through the hollow during the early morning hours, particularly in the time just before dawn. As resembling human voices, but speaking in languages that none of the listeners could identify, were described these sounds. Clearly through the winter air seemed to carry the voices despite apparent distances that should have made such communication impossible, and for hours at a time they sometimes continued. 41:49, the most extensive knowledge of local wildlife and natural phenomena possessed Thomas Kelly, who investigated these reports as thoroughly as conditions permitted. That the sounds were not produced by any known animal species in the region were confirmed by his observations, and organized speech patterns produced by human vocal cords suggested their characteristics. 42:12, however, that they were originating from locations that seemed impossible to reach during winter conditions indicated the acoustic properties of the sounds. From tracking expeditions that several residents attempted during brief periods when weather conditions permitted safe travel came additional disturbing evidence. 42:31, clear evidence of any movement through the area should have preserved the snow cover that blanketed the hollow throughout the winter months. Yet easy interpretation defied the tracks that were discovered. Evidence of regular use by multiple individuals showed numerous paths through the snow, yet areas that were separated by terrain features that should have made travel extremely difficult or impossible connected these routes. 42:58, more puzzling still, characteristics that seemed inconsistent with any known types of footwear or foot coverings used by local residents showed the footprint impressions. By individuals who were barefoot despite the freezing temperatures appeared to have been made some tracks, while footwear that was larger and differently shaped than any boots or shoes familiar to local residents suggested others. 43:24, most troubling were impressions that seemed to show individuals moving across snow-covered terrain without sinking to the depth that would be expected given the soft powdery nature of the snow cover. On January 18, 1893, when Reverend Isaiah Morris finally arrived in Black Hollow, a community that was struggling to make sense of events that seemed to challenge their understanding of normal human behavior and natural phenomena, he found. 43:52, a man of considerable education and experience was Reverend Morris, having served frontier communities throughout Missouri and Arkansas for more than 15 years. With cases involving mental illness, domestic violence, and various forms of religious extremism he had dealt, and by unusual circumstances or behavior he was not easily disturbed. 44:18, with the community leaders and the Kelly family provided him a comprehensive overview of the situation his initial meeting, but his own independent investigation before drawing any conclusions about appropriate courses of action he insisted on conducting. To interview Heinrich directly was his first priority, both to assess the boy's mental and physical condition and to obtain first-hand accounts of the events he had witnessed. 44:44, detailed, consistent, and deeply disturbing was Heinrich's testimony to Reverend Morris. A systematic transformation of his family that had begun shortly after Samuel's disappearance and had accelerated throughout the winter months described the boy. According to his account, not only changes in behavior and appearance, but also the acquisition of knowledge and capabilities that seemed to exceed normal human limitations involved this transformation. 45:13, by Heinrich's descriptions of his mother's activities and the apparent sources of the information and material she was using in her work was particularly troubled the Reverend. That Martha had gained access to written records and documents that contained detailed information about the history and geography of Black Hollow claimed the boy. 45:35, materials that seemed to have been created by previous inhabitants of the region whose identity and fate remained unknown. According to Heinrich, these documents included maps of cave systems that extended far beyond what had been explored by current residents, along with detailed descriptions of chambers and passages that contained artifacts and markings left by earlier occupants. 46:00, more significantly, instructions for various procedures and experiments that Martha was attempting to implement using local plants and minerals apparently provided the materials. His mother's apparent ability to communicate with individuals who were not physically present also described Heinrich, conducting extended conversations that seemed to involve the exchange of complex information about subjects ranging from local history to advanced techniques of medicine and chemistry. 46:32, both during Martha's solitary expeditions into the cave systems and during the nighttime meetings with mysterious visitors that the boy had observed from his concealed vantage point in the cabin's loft appeared to occur these communications. To attempt direct communication with the Grimm family members, particularly Martha and Jacob, was Reverend Morse's second priority. 46:54, more challenging than he had anticipated proved this, as neither individual seemed willing or able to engage in conventional social interaction. His presence and his role as a religious authority Martha acknowledged, but from a perspective that differed fundamentally from normal human relationships and concerns suggested her responses to his questions and counseling attempts that she viewed their conversation. 47:22, Martha's apparent knowledge of events and information that she could not possibly have obtained through conventional means was most troubling to the Reverend. During their conversation, recent occurrences in communities throughout the region she accurately described, including births, deaths, marriages, and other significant events in places she had never visited and with people she had never met. 47:49, more disturbing still were her references to historical events and geographical features that were not recorded in any available documents or maps. With authority about the activities of Native American groups who had inhabited the region centuries before European settlement spoke Martha, describing their customs, beliefs, and fate with specificity that suggested access to first-hand accounts or written records that had never been made public. 48-18. Detailed knowledge of the extensive cave systems that honeycombed the limestone bedrock beneath Black Hollow she also demonstrated, describing chambers and passages that were not marked on any available maps and providing accurate directions to locations that would have required years of systematic exploration to discover. 48:38. How she had acquired this information, when Reverend Morse asked, to sources of knowledge that operated outside the normal boundaries of human communication and learning, referred Martha's explanations. Equally disturbing, though for different reasons, proved Jacob Grimm's interview with the Reverend. 48:59. To a state of constant terror and confusion had been reduced the man who had once been known as a capable farmer and respected member of the community. As if she were a stranger who had somehow replaced the woman he had married, he spoke of his wife, describing changes in her personality, knowledge, and capabilities that exceeded what could be explained through normal processes of human development or adaptation. 49:25. Most significantly, that Martha now possessed access to information and abilities that no individual could have acquired through conventional study or experience, claimed Jacob. Her performed procedures and experiments that required knowledge of chemistry, botany, and medicine that she had never formally studied, he described witnessing. 49:49. Yet understanding that would have been impressive even in someone with advanced academic training demonstrated her work. That Martha seemed to be in regular communication with individuals who were not physically present, also reported Jacob, conducting detailed conversations that involved the exchange of complex technical information about subjects he could not understand. 50:12. Both during her solitary work periods and during the mysterious nighttime meetings that Heinrich had described occurred these communications, suggesting a network of contacts that operated through methods that defied conventional explanation. Perhaps most troubling of all were Jacob's claims about changes in the physical environment around their homestead. 50:36. Modifications to cave entrances and underground passages that appeared to have been made recently, he described discovering, yet the work would have required tools and techniques that were not available to local residents. Designed to facilitate access to previously unexplored areas of the cave systems, seemed these modifications, creating a network of connected chambers that extended far beneath the surface of Black Hollow. 51:03. Several additional days in the hollow attempting to gather more information about the situation and consulting with community leaders about possible courses of action spent Reverend Morse. However, by the severe winter conditions and by the apparent reluctance of the Grimm family to accept outside assistance or intervention was hampered his investigation. 51:26. On January 25, 1893, when he made the difficult journey through deep snow to visit the Grimm homestead accompanied by Thomas Kelly and 2 other community leaders, took place his final attempt to counsel the family directly. Even their worst expectations exceeded what they encountered there, and would provide the foundation for rumors and speculation that persisted in the region for generations. 51:54. Of recent activity that seemed inconsistent with the family's isolated circumstances showed the exterior of the cabin signs. To various outbuildings and cave entrances connected the main building fresh paths through the snow, yet evidence of use by multiple individuals whose identities remained unknown showed these paths. 52:17. More puzzling were the tracks that led to and from the homestead, impressions that suggested regular visits by people who were not members of the immediate community. Since the Kellys' previous visit had been further transformed the interior of the cabin, with additional materials and equipment that seemed to serve purposes related to Martha's ongoing activities and experiments. 52:41. A combination of laboratory and workshop now resembled the main living area, with glass containers, measuring devices, and preserved specimens arranged according to organizational principles that the visitors could not comprehend. Had continued to deteriorate Martha's appearance, malnutrition or illness suggesting her physical condition despite the apparent abundance of preserved food and other supplies in the household. 53:07. Polite but distant was her behavior during the visit, as if strangers rather than neighbors and religious authorities who had known her for years she were receiving. Most disturbing were her references to work and responsibilities that she described as being of vital importance not only to her family but to the broader community and region. 53:29. during this visit were unable to locate Jakob. The visitors, though safe and well cared for he was, Martha assured them. About his whereabouts, when pressed for more specific information, engaged in activities that required privacy and concentration, she explained that he was work that was essential to the success of the projects she was pursuing. 53:52, with the evidence of his terror and confusion that the visitors had witnessed during their previous encounter contrasted sharply her calm certainty about his condition. A brief appearance during the visit made young Rebecca, but even more than her mother's transformation had done, alarmed the community leaders. Her condition. 54:23, a considerable amount of weight appeared to have lost the girl, and the kind of exhaustion that suggested prolonged sleep deprivation or extreme stress showed her eyes. Most troubling was her apparent inability or unwillingness to communicate directly with the visitors, responding to questions only through gestures or single-word answers that provided little useful information. 54:42, unexplained and deeply troubling to all the visitors remained the complete absence of young Mary. By the obvious distress of the other family members and by the increasingly disturbing evidence of activities that seemed to involve risks that no responsible parent would expose a young child to, contradicted Martha's assurances that the child was safe and well cared for. 55:12, on January 27, 1893, with serious concerns about the welfare of the Grimm family and the safety of the broader community, left Black Hollow. Reverend Morse. To church authorities, in his official report, immediate intervention by law enforcement and medical professionals he recommended, but that the remote location and severe weather conditions made such intervention extremely difficult to arrange or implement, he acknowledged. 55:39, in personal journals that were not discovered until after his death many years later, was recorded his private assessment of the situation, more troubling. In these private writings, doubts about his ability to understand or address the forces that seemed to be operating in Black Hollow expressed Reverend Morris. 56:07, of knowledge and capabilities that exceeded his experience with normal human behavior. He described encountering evidence, and that the situation might require forms of intervention that went beyond conventional religious or legal remedies. He suggested no improvement to the Grimm family's circumstances brought February 1893, and if anything, more rapidly as the winter progressed toward its end, appeared to be deteriorating the situation. 56:36, that had isolated Black Hollow throughout the winter months began to show signs of breaking the severe weather, with occasional periods of milder temperature and reduced snowfall that allowed for limited travel and communication with the outside world. During one of these brief respites in the weather that the most dramatic and disturbing events of the entire crisis finally occurred. 56:57, on February 22, 1893, at the Kelly homestead in the early morning hours appeared Rebecca Grimm, her nightgown torn and blooded, her feet bare despite the frozen ground. In a state of complete hysteria she was, barely able to communicate coherently, but desperately attempting to convey that something terrible had occurred at her family's cabin. 57:22, the most detailed first-hand testimony available about the final stages of the Grimm family's ordeal would later prove to be Rebecca's fragmented account of the events of that night. According to her description, by sounds of struggle and violence coming from the main living area of the cabin, she had been awakened before dawn. 57:43, what appeared to be a violent confrontation with multiple individuals whose identities remained unclear in the darkness she found her mother engaged in when she investigated. That these individuals were not members of the local community, claimed the girl, but the mysterious visitors who had been coming to the cabin throughout the winter months seemed to be. 58:03, however, markedly different from the peaceful meetings that Hinrich had described in his earlier testimony was their behavior during this final encounter. Instead of the quiet, systematic exchange of information and materials that had characterized previous visits, loud arguments, physical struggle, and what Rebecca described as attempts by the visitors to remove items and materials from the cabin against Martha's wishes involved this gathering. 58:28, to Rebecca most terrifying was her mother's response to this confrontation. Physical strength and capabilities that exceeded normal human limitations appeared to have gained Martha, defending her possessions and territory with a ferocity that seemed impossible for someone in her weakened physical condition. 58:54, her mother overpower multiple adult opponents using techniques and weapons that she could not have learned through normal training or experience, described the girl witnessing. With the departure of the mysterious visitors apparently ended the confrontation, but not before a significant portion of the materials and equipment that Martha had been using in her experiments and research they had succeeded in removing. 59:15 of her mother's behavior following this encounter was more disturbing still. Rebecca's account. Some kind of breakdown or transformation that left her unable to recognize her daughter or respond to attempts at communication had apparently suffered Martha. In her confused and terrified state, for one of the individuals who had been attempting to steal her materials had apparently mistaken Martha Rebecca, and with the same violent intensity she had displayed during the confrontation with the actual intruders she had attacked the girl. 59:41, by fleeing into the winter night had managed to escape Rebecca only, running through deep snow and dangerous terrain to reach the safety of the Kelly homestead. A group of men to investigate the grim cabin and attempt to rescue any family members who might still be in danger immediately organized William Kelly. 1 hour and 4 seconds, Thomas Kelly, Reverend Morris, who was still in the area, and 3 other community leaders who had experience with emergency situations and crisis intervention included the party. Through the snow the difficult journey they made, and at the homestead as the sun was beginning to rise on what would prove to be one of the most disturbing crime scenes in the history of the Missouri Ozarks they arrived. 1 hour and 26 seconds of the violent struggle that Rebecca had described showed clear evidence the exterior of the cabin. Trampled and disturbed was the snow around the building, with what appeared to be bloodstains and other signs of physical conflict. More puzzling were the tracks leading away from the cabin, impressions that seemed to indicate the departure of multiple individuals, but did not match the footprint patterns of anyone known to be living in the region. 1 hour and 53 seconds, in a manner that suggested both systematic searching and violent rage, had been completely destroyed the interior of the cabin. Overturned and smashed had been furniture, broken and scattered throughout the rooms had been dishes and household items, and either removed or destroyed had been the carefully organized materials that Martha had been using in her experiments. 1 hour 1 minute and 17 seconds, most disturbing of all were the strange symbols that had been carved into the wooden walls, markings that appeared to have been made during the violent struggle and that seemed to follow patterns similar to those found in the cave systems of the region. In the root cellar was discovered Jacob Grimm, but that he had not survived the events of the previous night made clear his condition. 1 hour 1 minute and 41 seconds, such was the nature of his injuries that specific details in his official report declined to provide Dr. Samuel Morrison, the physician who was summoned from Forsyth to examine the scene. That the death appeared to be the result of extreme violence he noted only, and that the injuries were inconsistent with any form of accident or self-inflicted wound. 1 hour 2 minutes and 2 seconds, more troubling still was the complete absence of both Martha and young Mary. Despite thorough searching of the cabin and the immediate surrounding area, no trace of either individual could be found. As far as conditions permitted were followed the tracks leading away from the homestead, but at the rocky outcropping where Samuel's trail had ended months earlier they vanished, suggesting some connection between the current disappearances and the original mystery that had begun the family's ordeal. 1 hour 2 minutes and 33 seconds, by Sheriff Henry Coulson was conducted the official investigation that followed, assisted by deputies from the state capitol and a team of investigators who specialized in violent crimes and missing persons cases. However, the remote location, the severe weather conditions, and the unusual nature of the evidence made their work extremely difficult and ultimately inconclusive. 1 hour 2 minutes and 55 seconds, that Jacob Grimm had been murdered and that Martha and Mary Grimm were missing under circumstances that suggested either voluntary departure or abduction were able to confirm the investigators. However, more questions than it answered raised the physical evidence at the scene, and so unusual that it challenged the investigators' ability to develop coherent theories about what had actually occurred was the testimony of the surviving witnesses. 1 hour 3 minutes and 24 seconds, most puzzling was the apparent sophistication of the activities that had been taking place in the cabin prior to the final violent confrontation. Systematic scientific work that would have required education and resources that Martha Grimm could not possibly have possessed was suggested by the laboratory equipment and research materials that had been partially destroyed or removed. 1 hour 3 minutes and 47 seconds, markings discovered in various cave systems throughout the region matched the carved symbols found throughout the cabin, indicating connections to a broader network of activities and individuals whose identity remained unknown. Compounds and substances that were not native to the Missouri region and that could not have been easily obtained through normal commercial channels were revealed by chemical analysis of residues found in the destroyed laboratory equipment. 1 hour 4 minutes and 17 seconds, from plants that grew only in distant geographical areas appeared to be derived some of the materials, while characteristics that suggested synthetic production using techniques that were extremely advanced for the time period showed others. Perhaps most disturbing of all was the discovery of human remains in various stages of preservation, materials that appeared to have been used in Martha's experimental work, but whose origin could not be determined through available investigative techniques. 1 hour 4 minutes and 48 seconds, knowledge of anatomy and chemistry that would have been remarkable even among trained medical professionals of the era suggested the condition and treatment of these remains. In April 1893 concluded officially the investigation, with Jacob Grimm's death classified as murder by unknown perpetrators and Martha and Mary Grimm listed as missing persons. 1 hour 5 minutes and 12 seconds, for Martha's arrest in connection with her husband's death were issued warrants, but any meaningful pursuit impossible made the lack of clear evidence about her whereabouts or the circumstances of her disappearance. In the care of distant relatives in Springfield, Missouri, was placed Rebecca Grimm, where for the rest of her short life she remained. 1 hour 5 minutes and 33 seconds, a young woman who had been permanently marked by her experiences in Black Hollow described those who knew her during her final years. About her family or the events she had witnessed she rarely spoke, and when she did discuss her past, fragmented and contradictory were often her accounts. Signs of severe psychological trauma that seemed to go beyond what would normally be expected, even from someone who had experienced the violent death of a family member, noted medical professionals who examined Rebecca. 1 hour 6 minutes and 5 seconds, symptoms that suggested exposure to experiences that had challenged her fundamental understanding of reality she displayed, and the ability to form normal social relationships or function independently in conventional society she never fully recovered. In 1901 at the age of 25 was Rebecca's death, officially attributed to consumption, but unusual characteristics in her condition that they found difficult to explain through conventional medical knowledge noted physicians who treated her during her final illness. 1 hour 6 minutes and 38 seconds, correspondence with unknown individuals throughout her years in Springfield she had apparently maintained, receiving letters and packages that she never discussed with her caretakers or relatives. More intriguingly, some of the unusual abilities that had characterized other members of her family had apparently continued to demonstrate Rebecca. 1 hour 7 minutes and 1 second, remarkable knowledge of events occurring in distant locations she showed, and understanding of natural phenomena and scientific principles that exceeded what could have been learned through normal education or experience she possessed. After Rebecca's death, by relatives who hoped to gain insights into her experiences and perhaps locate other surviving family members were examined her personal possessions. 1 hour 7 minutes and 28 seconds, journals, letters, and various artifacts that provided the most detailed account available of the Grimm family's activities and the forces that had ultimately destroyed them were found among her belongings. That the family's involvement with the mysterious knowledge and capabilities that had led to their downfall had begun much earlier than previously suspected revealed these documents. 1 hour 7 minutes and 53 seconds, according to Rebecca's private writings, of a network of individuals and families throughout the Ozark region who had been working to preserve and extend ancient forms of knowledge that they believed had been possessed by previous inhabitants of the area had been part the Grimms. Through a combination of written communication and direct meetings that were carefully concealed from the broader community apparently operated this network. 1 hour 8 minutes and 19 seconds, about discoveries made in cave systems, artifacts, and markings that provided clues to the activities of earlier peoples and techniques for accessing forms of consciousness and perception that transcended normal human limitations shared information members. According to Rebecca's account, Samuel's disappearance had not been accidental, but a planned transition to a different level of involvement with this hidden knowledge had represented. 1 hour 8 minutes and 49 seconds, on his demonstrated sensitivity to the forces and influences that the network was studying had been selected and his apparent disappearance had actually been a form of graduation to activities that required complete separation from conventional society. The result of her attempts to follow Samuel's path and achieve the same level of integration with the hidden knowledge that the network preserved had been Martha's transformation throughout the winter of 1892 to 93. 1 hour 9 minutes and 21 seconds, however, by factions within the network who believed that she was moving too quickly and taking risks that threatened the security of their broader activities had been opposed her efforts. The climax of a struggle between these competing factions had been the violent confrontation that had resulted in Jacob's death and the destruction of the cabin, with Martha ultimately choosing to join Samuel rather than submit to the limitations that her opponents sought to impose upon her work. 1 hour 9 minutes and 51 seconds, that she had been taken along on this journey either as a participant or as a hostage whose fate remained tied to her family's ultimate destiny suggested Mary's disappearance. About the locations and contents of various cave systems throughout the Black Hollow region also provided detailed information Rebecca's journals. 1 hour 10 minutes and 20 seconds, by network members who had systematically explored and documented the underground chambers and passages, had been gathered over several generations. This information. Extensive collections of artifacts, written records, and preserved materials that documented the activities of peoples whose civilization had achieved levels of knowledge and capability that exceeded those of contemporary American society apparently contained these caves. 1 hour 10 minutes and 58 seconds, that the network's activities were continuing despite the tragic fate of her family suggested Rebecca's writings, with other individuals and groups carrying on the work of exploration, documentation, and practical application of the hidden knowledge. Names, locations, and coded communication methods that indicated an organization of considerable scope and sophistication she provided. 1 hour 11 minutes and 28 seconds, a new investigation by Dr. Edmund Hartwell, the professor of anthropology from Washington University, who had been studying folklore and legends of the Ozark region, prompted the discovery of Rebecca's documents. That the materials provided unprecedented insights into forms of knowledge and social organization that had previously been dismissed as superstition or imagination, recognized Dr. Hartwell. 1 hour 11 minutes and 56 seconds, conducted between 1901 and 1905, involved his investigation's systematic exploration of the cave systems identified in Rebecca's journals, along with attempts to locate and interview other members of the network she had described. Extremely dangerous due to the remote locations involved and the apparent hostility of network members toward outside interference was this work. 1 hour 12 minutes and 33 seconds, of continuous human habitation and activities spanning several centuries contained evidence the cave systems explored by Dr. Hartwell's team, including extensive modifications to natural chambers and passages that demonstrated sophisticated engineering and construction techniques. More remarkable were the collections of written materials, scientific instruments, and preserved specimens that had been maintained in these underground locations, representing a level of systematic research and documentation that rivaled the work of major academic institutions. 1 hour 13 minutes and 7 seconds, compounds and substances that were not native to North America and that could not be easily explained through known trade relationships or communication networks were revealed by chemical analysis of materials found in the caves. Using techniques that were extremely advanced for the historical periods in which they had apparently been created appeared to have been synthesized some materials, suggesting access to scientific knowledge that exceeded what was generally available to American society during the 19th century. 1 hour 13 minutes and 40 seconds, most intriguing were the extensive written records found in various cave locations. 1 hour 14 minutes and 15 seconds, communication and cooperation between network groups in different geographical regions also documented the written materials, indicating an organization that extended far beyond the Missouri Ozarks and that had maintained coordination despite the isolation and independence of its constituent communities. To similar groups operating in remote areas of Arkansas, Tennessee, Kentucky, and other states were found references, suggesting a network of remarkable scope and persistence. 1 hour 14 minutes and 43 seconds, that the network had maintained detailed records of contacts with peoples whose cultural and technological development exceeded that of mainstream American society also discovered Dr. Hartwell's team. Access to knowledge and techniques that formed the foundation for much of the network's activities appeared to have provided these contacts, though from available documentation remained unclear the identity and location of these advanced peoples. 1 hour 15 minutes and 16 seconds, perhaps most significantly, ongoing evidence of current activity revealed the cave explorations, suggesting that the network had survived the various crises and disruptions that had affected individual families and communities like the Grimms. Fresh modifications to cave systems, recently deposited materials and supplies, and maintenance of equipment and facilities indicated that the work was continuing despite the losses and setbacks that had occurred. 1 hour 15 minutes and 45 seconds, with current network members attempted to make contact Dr. Hartwell, but unsuccessful were these efforts and may have resulted in increased security measures that made further investigation more difficult. In 1905 completed, his final report documented the remarkable scope and sophistication of the organization he had discovered, but acknowledged that many questions about its current activities and ultimate objectives remained unanswered. 1 hour 16 minutes and 10 seconds, initially classified by university authorities due to concerns about public reaction and potential safety issues related to the remote cave systems, was the report. However, to federal agencies and academic institutions that specialized in anthropological and archaeological research were provided copies, leading to additional investigations that continued sporadically throughout the early decades of the 20th century. 1 hour 16 minutes and 33 seconds, an extended Dr. Hartwell's findings confirmed these subsequent investigations, revealing that the network had indeed survived and continued to operate despite increased attention from outside authorities. Of systematic expansion into new geographical areas, development of more sophisticated communication and coordination methods, and continued advancement in the practical application of the knowledge and techniques that form the foundation of their activities was found evidence. 1 hour 16 minutes and 59 seconds, more troubling to investigators were indications that network members had begun to achieve levels of capability and integration with their hidden knowledge that exceeded what previous generations had accomplished. Of individuals who demonstrated abilities that seemed to transcend normal human limitations began to circulate reports, including enhanced sensory perception, resistance to environmental extremes, and forms of communication that operated without conventional technological assistance. 1 hour 17 minutes and 35 seconds, by the 1920s, sufficiently concerned about the network's activities had become federal authorities to initiate systematic surveillance and investigation efforts. However, largely unsuccessful proved these official programs due to the network's sophisticated security measures and the extreme difficulty of operating in the remote areas where their activities were concentrated. 1 hour 17 minutes and 59 seconds, the few investigators who managed to penetrate network security and observe their activities directly returned with accounts that were so unusual that they were often dismissed as exaggeration or imagination. Underground facilities that demonstrated technological capabilities far in advance of what was generally available described these reports. 1 hour 18 minutes and 20 seconds, individuals who appeared to have undergone physical and mental modifications that enhanced their abilities beyond normal human ranges, and evidence of communication with groups or entities whose nature and location remained completely unknown. During the 1930s and 1940s, to decline or become even more carefully concealed appeared the network's activities, possibly in response to increased government attention and the disruptions caused by economic depression and World War. 1 hour 18 minutes and 52 seconds, however, of unusual phenomena and unexplained events in remote areas of the Ozarks and other regions where network activity had previously been documented continued to surface occasional reports. During the post-war period led to renewed official interest in the network and its activities, the development of more advanced investigative techniques. 1 hour 19 minutes and 16 seconds, however, that these sites had been abandoned, concealed, or deliberately destroyed to prevent outside access often found attempts to locate and study the cave systems and facilities that had been documented in earlier investigations. In 1965, the most comprehensive investigation of the network's history and current status that had been attempted since Dr. Hartwell's work 60 years earlier undertook Drive Patricia Wells of the University of Missouri. 1 hour 19 minutes and 42 seconds, from access to previously classified government documents and advanced archaeological techniques that provided new insights into the scope and significance of the organization's activities benefited her research. That the network had indeed survived the various disruptions and challenges of the 20th century confirmed Dr. Wells' investigation, though its current form and activities appeared to differ significantly from what had been documented in earlier periods. 1 hour 20 minutes and 17 seconds, that the organization had adapted to changing conditions by becoming more decentralized and technologically sophisticated, using methods that made detection and investigation by outside authorities increasingly difficult, suggested evidence. More significantly, indications that the network's long-term objectives involved preparation for changes in human society and environmental conditions that they believed were inevitable and necessary, discovered Dr. Wells. 1 hour 20 minutes and 48 seconds, to plans and preparations that seemed designed to preserve and protect certain forms of knowledge and capability during periods of social and technological disruption that the network anticipated in the future were found references. So significant were the implications of these discoveries that immediately classified by federal authorities was Dr. Wells's final report and has never been released for public review. 1 hour 21 minutes and 18 seconds, however, into government planning documents related to emergency preparedness and national security were incorporated portions of her research, suggesting that official agencies took the network's capabilities and objectives seriously. Today, nearly 130 years after the tragic events that destroyed the Grimm family, largely unchanged from its condition in the 1890s remains the Black Hollow region. 1 hour 21 minutes and 44 seconds, as protected wilderness has been designated the area, ensuring that casual exploration and development are prevented while preserving whatever secrets the region may still hold. Of unusual phenomena observed in the area continue to surface occasional reports, including unexplained lights, sounds, and evidence of human activity in locations that are supposed to be uninhabited. 1 hour 22 minutes and 11 seconds, as natural phenomena or the imagination of hikers and hunters are generally dismissed these reports, but their persistence suggests that some form of activity may indeed be continuing in the remote cave systems and hidden facilities of the region. In various government and academic archives are preserved the official records of the Grimm family tragedy and the subsequent investigations, though access to much of this material remains restricted. 1 hour 22 minutes and 40 seconds, from public memory has largely faded the story, remembered primarily by local historians and researchers who specialize in the folklore and legends of the Ozark region. However, for those who have studied the documented evidence and explored the implications of what was discovered, far more than an isolated frontier tragedy represents the Black Hollow case. 1 hour 23 minutes and 3 seconds, the systematic nature of the activities documented over more than a century, the sophistication of the knowledge and techniques involved, and the apparent continuation of the work despite various disruptions and challenges suggest an organization of remarkable persistence and capability. That such groups continue to operate in remote areas of the American wilderness, pursuing objectives that transcend the goals and understanding of mainstream society, raises the possibility of fundamental questions about the nature of human potential and the forms of knowledge that may exist outside conventional academic and scientific institutions. 1 hour 23 minutes and 35 seconds, whether the network's activities represent a beneficial preservation of ancient wisdom, a dangerous pursuit of power that threatens social stability, or something else entirely remains unclear from available evidence. What is certain is that a glimpse into forms of human achievement and organization that continue to operate beyond the boundaries of official knowledge and public awareness provides the story of Martha Grimm and her family's tragic fate. 1 hour 23 minutes and 56 seconds, their secrets continue to guard the mountains and forests of Missouri, but capabilities and knowledge that may prove to be of crucial importance to humanity's future development are suggested by the documented evidence to involve those secrets. That even in our modern age of global communication and scientific advancement, there remain aspects of human experience and potential that we are only beginning to understand serves as a reminder the Black Hollow case. 1 hour 24 minutes and 26 seconds, perhaps someday, when society has developed the wisdom and capability to safely approach these hidden forms of knowledge, opened will be the sealed caves and secret facilities of the Ozark Mountains and their contents fully examined. Until then, as Martha Grimm left them more than a century ago, they remain repositories of human achievement that exceeded the understanding of their time and continue to wait for future generations with the courage and vision to unlock their secrets. 1 hour 24 minutes and 56 seconds, silent now remains the hollow, its mysteries preserved beneath layers of stone and government classification. But echoes of the knowledge and capabilities that were once pursued there by individuals whose vision extended far beyond the boundaries of their historical moment still carries the wind that moves through the ancient trees.